Hello and welcome to this video from Caboodle Textiles. My name's Nicola and I'm a brand rep for Caboodle. Today we're going to have a look at sewing with a twin needle because it's something that a lot of people find difficult, and being able to sew with a twin needle will really get your makes up to the next level. So my rep fabric this month was this gorgeous yellow tractor jersey. This comes in several different colourways. It's really stretchy, lightweight jersey, perfect for summer dresses and t-shirts and leggings and lightweight harems or even shorts. So I've gone with a Made by Jack's Mum beachcomber, which I have constructed before the start of this video. The beachcomber is a really great pattern because it doesn't have too many lines on it, so you get to see the print really well. It also needs the sleeves hemming and the bottom hemming, and whilst you can get away with putting cuffs on everything if you hate hemming and hate using a twin needle, it's really nice to be able to get that professional finish and make it look like a pro garment by using a twin needle. So I'm going to show you today how you can do that for yourself. So what you're going to need to be able to twin needle hem is twin needle, and these will fit in your machine through the same shaft of a single needle. They come in different sizes, different widths, and they come in different weights. So for a thicker, heavier material, you'll need a size 90 or maybe even 100 if it's a very heavyweight alpine fleece, for example. But for a lightweight jersey, you're going to need a 75 or 80 needle. The width that it refers to, so you can get different types. This is a 1.6mm, this is a 4mm, is the distance between the two needles, and that's going to give you the width between the two stitch lines. So depending on your pattern, or whether it's for an adult or a child, will make the difference really, and it's essentially personal choice. The only thing that matters is that if your needles are very wide apart, that they'll still fit through the hole in the middle of your presser foot. You'll also need a steam iron that you can get really hot. You may need to turn that down slightly or use a presser cloth if you're using polyester fabrics, but for good quality cotton jersey like this, you want a really hot iron. And of course you're going to need your thread. So when you're using your twin needle, the first thing you're going to do is get some scraps, and you're going to practice and change your settings until they're perfect. You really don't want to be trial and erroring on the beautiful garment that you've just made. For this demonstration, I'm going to use contrast thread onto the jersey so that you can see what I'm doing. To prepare your fabric, the first thing you're going to do is to get your really hot iron and to press it exactly as you want it. If you've got very drapey jersey, you can use hem tape. This is the sort of thing that you can buy on the internet, or maybe your local sewing shop will stock it. Double-sided hem tape. You attach it to the edge of your hem, fold it over, it sticks in place, and then you iron. And this is wash away hem tape, so once you've washed it the first time, it all disappears. And if you're new, or if you've got particularly drapey fabric, then this can be really helpful in keeping things stuck in the right place. If you've got an overlocker, some people choose to overlock, usually using a 3-thread all the way around the edge, and then they fold up that overlocked hem. The only other hint I would give you is a deeper hem will flip up less than a narrower hem. So you generally want to use 3/4 of an inch on children's clothes and an inch hem on adult clothes. It's not going to fray, so it's not that that's a worry. It's just the weightier the hem, the more likely it is to stay in place and not flip up while you're playing or wearing the garment.
When you're hemming the beachcomber sleeve, then you do need to use a smaller hem, usually about 1 centimetre or so. This hem won't flip up because it's a dolman sleeve.
So I'm now going to show you how to thread your machine for a twin needle. So you should be able to insert your twin needle using the same single needle shaft that you use for an ordinary needle, and this will work for all sewing machines. It's really helpful to refer to your manual to work out if there's anything specific you need to do for your machine, but all machines can be adapted. The first thing is to install your bobbin as you would as standard. The next thing is to get your thread. For this demonstration, I'm going to initially use a contrasting thread so that you can see what I'm doing, but you might want to use a matching thread. When you're learning, definitely use a matching thread, because then if it goes a little bit wonky, you won't be able to see it. If it's a colour you're using commonly, obviously you might be able to have 2 spools of thread that you've bought. If you haven't, what you can do is load a spare bobbin with the same colour so that you can run that through without having to buy 2 full sets of thread. So the first thing to do is to load your first thread as standard. So my machine has to have the thread coming from underneath, and it's really important that this is correct when you are threading for a twin needle. So I'm just going to thread mine in the normal way. The presser foot needs to be up, and you can't use an automatic needle threader for this. So for the first thread, you'll see it's gone behind the standard tension area that the majority of machines do have. My machine comes with a twin needle second spool holder, and my manual says that the thread has to come across the front when you install the second thread. So rather than, if I turn that upside down, that would then be coming from behind, and if you do that, the thread will get tangled, so it needs to come across, and that's technically coming off in reverse. So if you're trying to work out what to do for your machine, it needs to come in the opposite direction, and then it comes across here and actually gets threaded in almost the same way. So the first stage is exactly the same, but for mine, you don't hook it behind the last little bit for the second needle, and then manually thread that. Both threads need to go behind the presser foot. Some machines will prefer it if you use a walking foot with a twin needle, or if you've got a very flimsy or very drapey fabric, if you're using Vicos, for example, rayon, thin bamboo, those kind of stretchy fabrics, you may need a walking foot. My machine copes extremely well with the standard J foot. In terms of other settings, I find it advantageous to reduce the speed, because the slower you go, the less likely you are to make a mistake. And then in terms of the stitch choice, you want a standard straight stitch. The width of your needle needs to fit in the hole in the middle of your presser foot. So for most people, you'll want to use the straight stitch that comes down the middle of the presser foot, as opposed to the usual one that you might use where it puts it off to the left. You need to manually check that your needle will fit through the hole, and it's easiest to do that by bringing it down with your hand rather than the machine, because trust me, you will smash your needle and potentially break your presser foot if you don't check this properly. So the other settings we need to talk about are stitch length and tension. For stitch length, you generally want to be slightly longer. You can't go too long, because if you do, you lose the stretchiness of the stitch itself. But I would say I need at least a 3.0, and I would increase that to 3.5 if my fabric is particularly thick.
This is just a quick photo to show you the difference on the back between a short stitch length at the top and a long stitch length at the bottom. Actually, the shorter stitch length is more stretchy.
In terms of for the tension, I've never needed to adjust my bobbin tension, but I find I do need to reduce my tension wheel right down for stretchy fabrics. For thicker, more stable fabrics, my machine would use a 2. For the lightweight jersey that I'm going to do today, I've already experimented and worked out that actually I need to use a 3. Test, 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 and test again, because your machine will have its own likes and dislikes for any particular fabric. So now I'm going to show you how you test and how you can show yourself that you're doing it right before you hem that beautiful garment that you've just finished making. So here I've got my practice piece of jersey, and I'm going to probably do several lines in order to work out what the right settings for this particular bit of fabric is. You want to make sure that your practice piece has got the same number of layers as your final piece has. So if you're hemming, your practice piece needs to have 2 layers of jersey. If you are top stitching a pocket, you might have 3 layers. If you're using hem tape, you want to make sure you've got hem tape underneath your practice piece, because you want the right tension, and you'll only get that by having the right thickness underneath your presser plate. So don't start too near to the edge of your fabric, because then it won't feed properly. Your sewing machine might be happier with a walking foot. If you're going over seams, you might need to use this button, which as you're sewing slightly decreases the tension on the pressure foot while you're going over a bump, and you just hold that down while you're sewing. Don't go too fast. So I'm going to put my needle in. Now with a twin needle, where you're hemming round in a circle that's going to overlap itself at the end, you're actually going to overlap the stitches. So that means you don't need to go backwards for the first few stitches. So now I'm going to not stretch the fabric and very steadily sew. Now the bobbin is doing something magical while I'm sewing, and it's essentially going and wrapping itself in a zigzag behind each of the threads. And that's what's going to mean that this stitch still stretches even though you've sewn a straight stitch. Just going to keep going. So if you've done this right, you should have no tunnelling, no nicks, should be flat, stretchy, and at the back should have a zigzag going between the 2 threads.
So this is a close-up of what the back should look like. The line of thread should be close to the edge, but a couple of millimetres away from it. This would reduce your hem flipping.
If it's tunnelling in the middle, so you've got a bump between the two threads, then you need to turn down your tension. If it's skipping stitches, you need to increase your stitch length, but try not to go above 4, because the longer the stitch length, the less stretchiness you have.
If it's the hem around the bottom of a dress, for example, then actually not having a very stretchy stitch won't be a problem. But if it's a top stitching round a neckline or round tighter sleeves, you will need to make it so it still stretches, because otherwise when you're taking the garment on and off, you will snap the thread. You want to make sure that you're using polyester thread, because cotton thread will snap. If you're having problems, you can always join the Caboodle Textiles Facebook group and we'll be willing to help you and assist you with answering your questions, because we do appreciate that this is quite a tricky technique to get right. So I'm now going to hem the sleeves of my beachcomber in the yellow tractor jersey. You want to start your hemming close to the underneath or the armpit sleeve, and that's because the start and the finish are not quite as neat, and if you do it under the arm they'll be hidden. Depending on how much you've turned under depends on where the edge of your fabric needs to be in order to make sure that the bottom captures the hemmed fabric itself. So you need to line up, for this I'm going to need to line up the edge of the clear bit of my foot, but sometimes I need to line up the outer edge of my presser foot or wider, and you're going to need to stay at a steady distance the entire way around so that it looks straight. So when you're learning, you're going to want to use lots and lots and lots of pins for this. As you get more practiced, you will probably be able to use fewer clips and pins. So we're just going to let the feed dogs do the work. I need to press my black button to get it over the seam of the armpit so that it doesn't skip stitches. But overall, you are just letting the feed dogs do the work so that you don't stretch it, because if you stretch it, you don't get as good a cosmetic result. I'm just sort of pulling it round so that I can feed it in straight. And then as you're coming round to the end of the circle, what you're wanting to do is line it up so it's going to completely meet the stitching where you started at the beginning, and you're going to overlap by 2 or 3 stitches so that it doesn't become undone. And then you want to leave a decent tail so that you can finish off. So stretch it out after you've done it, and what you'll find is if you use a really hot iron at this point, it'll flatten out anything that you're not 100% about. That's come out really well. And then there's lots of different ways to finish this off. You can actually just trim the threads, the initial ones that you've overlapped where you started sewing. And then what I do is take an ordinary sewing needle and just pull these threads, the ones from the finishing sewing, through to the back. So I just put them in a needle through to the back and tie them onto the bobbin thread, and little knot, trim them, and then I've never had anything come undone from using that technique. If you're going to do that, you do need to make sure that the fabric's on a stretch before you knot it, because otherwise it'll be under too much tension, and the first time you stretch the fabric you'll break the thread. And that's how you do twin needle hemming. Rinse and repeat.